Greetings, everybody. Thanks for joining us today for this outstanding and timely webinar, GRESB Inside ESG, How Water Efficiency Drives Environmental Excellence. I'm Dan Winters, Senior Director at GRESB, based in the Americas region. 2024 marks a big year for GRESB, 15 years of industry progress. Started in 2009 at the behest of major institutional investors, GRESB is the global ESG benchmark for real assets. 15 consecutive years of uninterrupted growth. Over 3,000 submissions to the GRESB benchmarks in 2023. Of those, 2,084 are real estate portfolios, 70 countries, 170,000 buildings. ESG means business. Institutional investors seek best-in-class managers to deliver superior risk-adjusted investment returns, decarbonize portfolios, and be partners in progress. Today, we're joined by two of the leading water management companies in the GRESB universe. Let's start with Europe. Smartvatten, based in the European region with offices in Finland, Denmark, Sweden, Norway, Germany, and the Netherlands. Monitor and measure, analyze, and optimize. Smartvatten is relied on by 20,000 properties, 200,000 apartment units, 50,000 leaks are detected annually, saving their clients 50,000 euros a day. Now in the Americas region, HydroPoint, based in California, offering clients water solutions at scale. 30,000 customers rely on HydroPoint's leak flow detection systems, smart irrigation technologies, and water monitoring services. Both companies share a passion for innovative solutions for water management. And besides them, we have two other guests today. Both firms long-standing GRESB members and both of them are long-standing GRESB members and benchmark participants. On the European side, AXA Investment Management, 300 investment professionals, 3,000 properties, 23 countries. 25 different fund submissions have come in from AXA over its history into the GRESB benchmark. The vast majority are GRESB 4 or 5 stars. On the American side, Essex Property Trust, 260 apartment buildings up and down the West Coast, a strong 6-point jump in its GRESB score last year, well above the benchmark average when it comes to the water aspect, solid 4-star performance, second in its peer group, and a near perfect public disclosure grade. So why are we talking about water? It's a fundamental foundational element of life and a sizable component of a GRESB score. Too much of it, a big problem. Too little of it, a bigger problem. Too often underappreciated, definitely underpriced. Bottom line, water matters. It's an important element in an ESG context. A little housekeeping. This session is being recorded. It will be available to all attendees when we're finished. Please use the chat function for questions and answers. We will do our best to answer your inquiries live. GRESB is headquartered in Amsterdam. Privileged to co-host today's webinar with my colleague, Martina Danevska. Martina, let's talk a little bit about the impact of water within the GRESB real estate assessment.
Thank you, Dan. Good morning and good afternoon, everyone. I'm Martina Danevska. I'm an account manager within GRESB based in Amsterdam, and I'm looking after our EMEA partners. So thank you all for joining us today. And as Dan mentioned, today we're diving into a critical yet often overlooked topic, which is water management. As part of the real estate assessment, we collect data on water usage and the water efficiency measures as part of the risk assessment implemented by the real estate companies. So the insights we've gained are profound. So let's dive in. So before I go into the details, let me first explain what is this chart about. As part of the performance component of the GRESB real estate assessment, we are collecting data on the capacity or ability of the real estate companies to collect data over the water consumption. So on the first chart, we have displayed the trend analysis over the 3 years for each market, APAC, Americas, EMEA, and the average. So GRESB, the maximum score that the real estate entities can get is 7 points, and they are split into 3 categories. So 4 points are allocated to data coverage, 2 points are for like-for-like performance improvement, and 1 point is for water reuse and recycling. So the data that is reported is on the asset level. something that is really important to emphasize. So what we see on the first chart, at first it seems like there is a downward trend. However, I would say more is balancing out for the COVID effects. As in 2021, we can see that the entities average scored higher. So APAC is leading with 4.9 scores out of 7. And Americas and EMEA are a little bit behind. And of course, that can be explained by the little or less consumption of water during this year. And so consequently, in 2022 and 2023, the trend is a little bit downward, which is catching up with the level of pre-COVID. So many of you are probably asking, what is the reason for this? So there are other various reasons within GRESB that we explain this trend. But I would definitely like to focus on the water efficiency measures and see, for example, why APAC region is outperforming EMEA and Americas. So going to the next slide. Yes, so this indicator, we call it RA4. This is part of the risk assessment for the performance component. And here we talk about the average percentage of portfolio covered by each of these components by region. So for this component, there are actually 9 water performance measures. However, we just took 3 which are more important or the most frequently used by the entities. So in this slide, actually, we can see that one of the reasons why APAC is also outperforming the other regions is because of the water efficiency measures that they have implemented. So I'm happy today to be joined by Dan and Carl. So I'll be more excited to hear what they think about this and how do they see this in each region. Consequently, maybe Carl can shed some light in Nordics and Ben can talk about the California region. Dan, you have something to add here?
I was just going to add the other element that drives these numbers is the growth of the benchmark. So when you have new entrants come into the benchmark, oftentimes water is, people are focused on energy, they're focused on GHG, and water is a little bit secondary. So as the benchmark continues to grow, sometimes the numbers will dive a little bit, needing our friends at SmartVatten and HydroPoint to help out the benchmark participants. So with that, let's start in Europe, and Carl, we'll start with you, and then we'll go to Ben, and introduce yourselves, talk a little bit about your organizations. Carl.
Thank you, Dan. And it's a real honor and pleasure to be here together with you and HydroPoint and our valued customers, all talking about our passion for water efficiency here. Yeah, I'm the head of business development and chief product and strategy officer at SmartVatten, and I'm calling in from Stockholm, Sweden today. And SmartVatten was founded over 10 years ago, and ever since we've been squarely focused on water efficiency. And our mission has been to enable the most efficient use of water across the water cycle through our scalable digital solutions. And by improving the water efficiency, we help our customers not only to reduce the water consumption, but also to reduce the water-related energy consumption and the CO2 emissions, and thereby to contribute, of course, to all their other sustainability goals here. Yeah, we've been around since we were founded in 2013, and we have now grown to an organization of approximately 130 people, and we have offices now in 6 countries, and we're operating in Northern Europe primarily. But we do, of course, follow our clients who also want to do installations in other parts of the world, and I think we have deployments in more than 30 countries by now. As you mentioned, Dan, we have connected more than 20,000 buildings, and we have 200,000 apartments covered by our water monitoring services. And we do offer AI-driven water analytics services, both for the water utilities, so for the water distribution and wastewater collection networks, as well as for the real estate sector. And we do monitor both the existing water meters of a building, but we can also install new metering points. And obviously, every time connecting those with our advanced real-time monitoring and our cloud-based platforms. Also, we are well aligned with the GRESB methodology. We do focus on enabling portfolio rollouts, ensuring that our typical clients can quickly get on top of the water situation across hundreds or even thousands of their assets. And thereby we enable the capture of the full additional 7 GRESB points that Martina talked about here through our services here. As you mentioned, Dan, we do see leakages. On average, we see leakages every second month in each monitored building. And as I mentioned, all this water that is wasted, that drives costs, that may cause damage to the buildings, and it represents a waste of all the energy that went into purifying, pumping, and heating the water to its point of use. And we do see, obviously, going forward, water is a finite resource. Population is growing with climate change, increasing droughts and water scarcity is looming. So water efficiency will matter even more in the future, and that is what Smart Vatten is there to help with.
All right. Beautiful, Carl. Thank you. Let's go now across the pond, across the continent to California. Ben, how are you?
Hello, everyone. Thanks for taking time to watch. HydroPoint Data Systems is a 21-year-old company. We're focused solely on water use efficiency. Our first products were around smart irrigation, replacing human guesswork with proven climate science to replace water that's taken from the ground via evaporation. With over 38,000 network devices on the WeatherTrack platform, customers reduce their water use consumption by taking the guesswork out of the hands of a contractor and putting science to work to properly apply water. About 6 years ago, our customers came to us and said, "You've done a great job managing water on landscapes. We also use water domestically for tenants in cooling towers, in pools, fountains, kitchens, laundry, etc. How can you help us gain control of those functions?" And so we developed a solution called Water Compass, which is a flow monitoring, leak detection, and water data analytics service. By capturing water data from a water meter or using an ultrasonic sensor by clamping onto a pipe, we can give a customer a view of their water use well in advance of a bill daily with hourly time slices, which then gives them the ability to spot anomalous use and prevent damage and waste. There are many costs associated with water. The most visible one is the utility expense. But subterranean to that, much like an iceberg, 90% of those costs might live below the surface. And those include property damage, slip fall hazards, insurance premium risk, mold, etc. So not managing water properly can create a myriad of benefits or myriad of problems, which then become benefits when you manage it properly. The company has focused itself on owners of real property. So we have lots of customers in real estate investment trust markets. We have municipalities. We have educational institutions from K-12 to upper ed. Pretty much anyone that manages water domestically is a WeatherTrack customer. Today, I want to introduce Ryan Yetzer from Essex Property Trust. Ryan is the Senior Director of Sustainability and ESG for Essex, and they are a customer of HydroPoint since 2017.
Yeah, thanks, and thanks for having me. As Ben said, I'm Ryan with Essex Property Trust. I've been with Essex for a little over a year and a half now, but I have been in the REIT industry for over 15 years, with the last 6 specializing in sustainability and ESG. Much like many folks in my space or in this space, I gravitated towards it out of necessity at a previous company. Basically, when investors came calling and asking, what are we doing about ESG? And we didn't have good answers, a few of us kind of put that hat on and started working on it. And that's how I got here. Essex itself is a multifamily real estate investment trust, which is one of the asset classes that Ben mentioned. We have approximately 250 assets representing over 60 million square foot. And over 60,000 units located in California and Washington states, largely concentrated in key West Coast metro areas like LA, San Diego, Bay Area, and Seattle. We were established in 1971 with an IPO in 1994 and have a market cap of $22.7 billion as of the end of 2023. I think that says enough about myself and our company if you want to jump into it, Ben.
Sure. So, Ryan, since joining, tell us a little bit about some of the measures that you inherited that had already been performed around water use efficiency and what new measures you've been working with.
Okay. So water measures specifically, most of our efforts, as Dan had mentioned, were around decarb initially, but so our early water savings measures actually revolved around leveraging rebate programs to replace, resident appliances like toilets and faucets and things like that. And we continue to monitor our water usage over the years, but it was secondary, as Dan had mentioned. But we decided to make, last year we made our first formal water goal, and we decided to make that a 10% reduction goal by 2030 from a 2021 baseline year. And the reason we picked 2021 speaks to what we were talking about earlier, is that especially in multifamily, it's really tough to gauge pre-pandemic usage to post-pandemic usage. So we felt that 2021 represented kind of a cross-section of when people started to return to work a little bit. I think most people in the States, and California especially, are going back to work 2 or 3 days a week. And in 2021 was the first time we started to see that level out. Additionally, as part of one of our larger acquisitions, as we mentioned, Essex inherited 59 properties that had HydroPoint controls installed. We're also looking at larger xeriscaping projects and things like that. But we feel our primary focus is to mitigate the unnecessary water loss that we see on site that we already control.
With most of your portfolio in California and up into Washington, you're really operating in a complex environment of water stress where there is periodic shortage. Recent rainfalls and snowpack have alleviated some of the drought concerns, but it hasn't changed the water rate increases that have been in effect and continuing to grow. And water agencies have typically, held water rates lower to attract development, which brings property tax and sales tax and other things to communities. But with aging infrastructure, it's time for them to now start raising rates. And the Metropolitan Water District of Southern California just announced a series of fairly significant rate increases, which will affect more than half of your portfolio. Washington State, everybody thinks about it being a wet emerald forest. They go through periods of drought as well. And so managing water scarcity, managing the threat for not enough, or managing how to control too much being applied to a landscape, or even being used by domestic applications like swimming pools with stuck fill valves, or cooling towers, or steam heat that again, equipment failures create anomalous use. So all of these things represent challenges that you face in operating your asset portfolio. And so I think the audience would benefit from learning just more about how you plan to focus, what areas you think are most important to focus on in the near term to help you get to that 10% reduction goal.
Yeah, so with the 10% and multifamily, I'll back up a little bit and say, with electric and gas, most of our utilities are sub-metered. And so our residents pay for those individually. We don't have a lot of visibility into it, but we also have no control. With water, we actually, we have very few areas where we're sub-metered. So we are reporting on all of our water usage, and that leaves us with only a couple levers to pull, since most of that water usage is taking place inside of our tenant units. One is educate the tenants and the residents and make sure that they are following best practices as best we can, which we certainly do. And then the other is to mitigate the common area usage, right? And that is where we see our biggest opportunity zone, which is optimization of that. And the biggest piece, of course, is the irrigation. We don't have a whole lot of public, other than pools, other than that, it's irrigation is what we're talking about for common area usage. And you bring up California. I think it's funny because I've only worked in California for a couple of years, and the first year was basically conserve. We have all these regulations, and like you said, we get a little bit of snow and a little bit of rain, and it's like, oh, never mind, there's no water crisis. So it is funny, and I expect it to continue to ebb and flow, and then continue to be an issue going forward. But yeah, as far as the pricing, that presents more opportunities, right? So the more we can mitigate, the easier it is to justify spending money on more controls, flow monitoring, and leak detection and services like that we haven't implemented yet.
I mean, key to capturing the data for ESG purposes, it also helps you when you have total visibility of your portfolio start to develop benchmarks or metrics for comparative analytics. How much water is a community using per building envelope? Or how much water are we using per irrigated acre? How does that compare with other properties in our portfolio, near to one another or across the state? Also the ESG data, while important, if you're waiting for water bills, sometimes the timeliness of that data becomes problematic. And so if you get real-time data with hourly time slices, it not only gives you more rapid data collection, but also provides insight into anomalous use, and it lets you and your teams take action before problems become apparent by an increased water bill. What goes wrong on irrigation systems are myriad. Valves get stuck and continuously run. Heads get mowed over by a maintenance crew and break, and water goes 30 feet in the air when no one's watching because it happens at night. People over-apply water because they see dry topsoil, not knowing that water lives beneath the soil around the roots and the plants don't need it. So complex management of irrigation systems has been a challenge for multifamily forever. And so our goal as a company is to help drive water use efficiency, which improves GRESB scoring, but also from an asset perspective, drives improved NOI by reducing net operating expenses. And in that same bargain, lowers cap rate, which then makes it more valuable at exit when properties are liquidated in their business development life cycle. So there's lots of financial reasons as well as scoring reasons for managing water. Dan, let's pass it back to Carl and Thomas.
Thank you.
Okay, so we've heard a little bit about the U.S. When we get back to everybody, I'm really going to be keen to ask Ryan how the 10% goal is going. I know we're the first year on that, but nonetheless, I watch people set goals, and within a year or two, bang, they achieve it. It's like, whoa, we need a better goal. So let's go back to that one when the time is right. All right, let's introduce Carl and his guest, Thomas from AXA Investment Management. Carl, I'm going to hand the ball over to you.
Thank you, Dan. And I'd like to welcome Thomas von Rumpe here, Responsible Investment Officer of AXA Investment Managers. And we've been working together for a number of years, Thomas. I know you fairly well by now, but I'd like you to introduce maybe to the rest of the audience yourself.
Thank you, Carl. From my side as well, it's an honor to be here. As Carl said, I'm part of the responsible investment team of AXA Malt. In a previous position, I was ESG lead for our Benelux and Germany operations, which means that I was working together with our local asset management teams on operationalizing our ESG strategy. Currently, I'm more focused as part of our team on building the respective strategy to ensure that we not only meet our net zero targets, but also go beyond, because it's not only about carbon, it's also about other aspects such as water, which we will be discussing today. AXA Alt, the manager which I represent, is managing around 3,000 buildings, of which the majority is located in the EU, but we also have assets in the US, Australia, Japan, and are still actively expanding. And this is why it's key to discuss these kind of topics from more of a global perspective, since we are not talking to just Europe, we're also talking about the rest of the world, and we need a dedicated strategy. Maybe to talk about strategy.
Yeah, maybe you could elaborate. I know you have a very ambitious ESG agenda overall, and maybe you can elaborate a little bit on that and how water plays into your overall ESG strategy also.
Sure, Carl, thanks. So in terms of strategy, it's not only about net zero. I think our company is quite fairly known for its commitment to ESG and responsible investment. So it's no surprise to see a net zero target there. What I think is important to mention, as I've already flagged in the beginning, is that it's not just about carbon. There are also a lot of other topics which are important to address, and water is definitely one of those. So we have embedded water directly in our respective strategy in multiple aspects. So we have certifications. Certifications are, for example, BREEAM, we have DGNB and others. BREEAM is quite fairly known because it's applied in multiple geographies, while DGNB is one which is a little bit more local. We use these kind of certifications because they provide us a kind of umbrella perspective and allows us to compare assets from asset class such as office to office across multiple geographies. Then we have others such as GRESB. GRESB, I will come back on that, is quite important for us because it allows us to assess on fund level the respective performance and also integrates water in terms of coverage and efficiency. Then we have tenant engagement, because getting access to data is one thing if you are the respective landlord for landlord spaces, yet you always have a tenant to deal with and you need to engage with your tenant to get data access and later on to react to that respective data, so to really implement that respective strategy. We also have a target with respect to an ESG rating. We have developed an internal ESG rating since and have been applying that since 2016. We regularly update that, and I will show you in a minute how we have embedded water in that.
Yeah, great. Thanks, Thomas. And I think you were onto something there. I think we're all eager to hear how you have really operationalized water management and integrated that and in your frameworks here.
So with respect to operationalization, maybe coming back to what I've mentioned before is the internal ESG rating. So we've been using an internal ESG rating since 2016 as sort of an umbrella term to capture all of the different ESG aspects. Why? Also to give our asset management teams who are working day-to-day on the respective assets a tool where they could capture all of the facets of ESG. So not only energy, carbon, but also all of the other aspects, biodiversity and water. And water is quite well embedded in there, not only from a coverage perspective, it is also reflecting a year-on-year fluctuation, and our asset managers are rewarded with respect to the respective scores when they're able to decrease that water. And for that, again, that is where the tenant engagement is also crucial. It's because without engaging the tenant, we cannot decrease that respective water usage. We've also embedded in there certain measures. This can be the deployment of smart meters, such as SmartVatten, but it can also be certain actions as applying more efficient fixtures, developing dedicated guides to facilitate the respective use of an asset and the local equipment. With respect to SmartVatten, maybe to mention that, we've started working together mainly in one geography, starting with 12 assets, and currently we've scaled it up to 9 countries and around 300 assets. Why? Because we are taking the approach that we need to understand what our assets are consuming first, so getting to data coverage. And I think what we established with SmartVatten in terms of a multi-country rollout strategy was key. And the next step is actually understanding that data. So that's what we're focusing on now, is actually benchmarking an asset's performance so that we can understand what an asset, what an efficient asset is, and then it's reacting to that data, which will be really focusing on as a sort of next step.
Yeah, it's really been a great journey together with AXA IM here for SmartVatten, also to expand to these 9 countries and more than 300 assets here. And you were onto it a little bit here already, Thomas, but can you say something about how you're actually using that data and how you see that the next steps would be of our collaboration and your specific priorities related to water management?
On this, I can briefly make the turn back to GRESB as well, and with respect to one of our key targets. So getting access to data for us is key, also because without having data, you're unable to understand it, you're unable to benchmark it, and you're unable to react to it. That's why we're monitoring quite closely on asset level the respective performance, but we're also committed to initiatives such as GRESB. Last year, we submitted 19 funds, and I think that our commitment to data and the applications of initiatives such as the ESG rating, but also working together with industry partners, has paid off and has been shown throughout the respective GRESB results. And that will also be what we will be focusing on moving forward. It's really expanding on that data coverage, moving from data coverage to data understanding. So it's benchmarking the respective assets, And next, it's increasing on the respective engagement to really ensure that you have the full circle, that you have the data, you understand it through a benchmark, you know whether your asset is operated efficiently or not, and that you can then react to that data, which is the key next step, which we'll be focusing on moving forward. We're also, besides our standing assets, applying dedicated components as part of our development policy. So we have done a complete revamp of our development policy to be up to the market, to ensure that when we redevelop an asset or we develop an asset is as efficiently operated as possible, and have used dedicated frameworks such as the taxonomy as a basis to ensure that when we deliver an asset, it's not only one of the most efficient with respect to its benchmark, but it's also taxonomy compliant. And for that, working with industry stakeholders such as Smartvatten or initiatives such as GRESB is absolutely crucial.
Great, thank you, Thomas, and thanks also for really driving the agenda here on the water efficiency side here. I think it's with the help of progressive clients like you that we also progress this topic together here. With that, I think I'll hand it back to Dan, and we can take it in a bigger forum. Any questions, etc.
Excellent. Thanks, guys. I really liked what Thomas was talking about with the, what do you do next with the data? So I want to pick at that a little bit. But before we go there, right, so there's two main topics that are kind of bubbling around. One is stormwater management. I live in the Washington, D.C. metro area. Our stormwater costs have gone through the roof since 2018. And part of this was to reflect the new infrastructure that needed to be built to manage stormwater. It's a big challenge here with many American cities. So this is kind of a grab bag question to talk about stormwater management. Whoever wants to jump in and talk about some strategies there. And then we're going to get to the next part, which is inertia. I think that a lot of what ESG competes with is inertia. And I'm keen to tease out strategies with on the ground asset management driving these initiatives forward. So first up, stormwater. Who wants to grab it? Ben, Carl, Thomas, Ryan, go. Who's going to do it?
Well, I'll start it off by saying there are three main categories in the water segment. There's supply, most thought of by water being delivered through water agencies, wholesale or retail. There's end use, which is where HydroPoint focuses, helping customers gain visibility to end use of water. And then there's treatment, where water goes down the drain, gets a sewer charge applied to it, gets reclaimed, recycled, turned back into potable for drinking or sub-potable for irrigation, and then piped back into the system. Stormwater management, I guess could be thought of in terms of supply. How do you catch stormwater? How do you treat it? How do you reuse it? And there are companies that focus on that. California's long been faulted for not having better stormwater capture for all the rain we get, which then flows through various sources, rivers, streams, aqueducts, back into the ocean. And so there's very little captured reuse. There's been in the last 5 years, an increased focus by large water retailers on putting stormwater capture facilities in place. So they've got, dependable water supplies. Most water agencies think about, resiliency and think about protecting a water supply for the future use of their communities. And so stormwater management focuses into that. Where you live, Dan, DC is built on a swamp. And so there's nowhere for that water to go. So stormwater capture winds up being a problem that includes excavation and then, putting tanks in place and then putting treatment systems in place to keep the water from being fetid. So there are lots of companies that do that kind of work. And for any audience member that wants referral on those, I know a few companies that work on that.
And I can also add a little bit to that. So Smartvatten, we have a solution not only for the real estate sector, but also for the water agencies or the water utilities who actually have to deal with the stormwater in the treatment plants and so on. And what we see is that as much as 60% of the water that is collected back to the treatment plants is stormwater that shouldn't really be treated, right? It belongs to nature somehow. So our solution is there to analyze where does that stormwater actually kind of infiltrate into the wastewater pipes where it shouldn't be really. So that's one aspect. But for a real estate client, what that means in practice is that there is a massive need for investments in our supply and wastewater collection systems by the water utilities. And that is driving an increase of the water tariffs. And we see that in Europe across the board now. So just in my hometown of Stockholm, the rates were increased by 25% last year. And speaking to industry experts over here, they expect the water tariffs to quadruple. So 4 times increase now in the next 10 to 20 years because of all the investment needs that we have in the piping systems. You know, many of those systems were built out 100 years ago almost, the water supply systems in our European and American cities.
Ryan, are you feeling it in your bills? Stormwater?
Yeah, I was going to say, I certainly am not the expert on this like Ben or Carl, but as an owner, I've seen bills where our wastewater or our stormwater is actually 3 times more expensive than the water we actually use. So it represents a huge opportunity zone for us when we can mitigate any of the water usage that would be wasted and going down that storm. Obviously, we get to take off whatever we save as far as what our payback would be, but also then we can incorporate what we would save for not putting that into the stormwater system. So I see it as a huge opportunity. I don't want the rates to rise, but obviously it does help when we're talking about putting in more systems and paying for these systems that we're talking about.
When considering wastewater, another thing, it's really important when building a new community to integrate wastewater capture in new construction, because it's far easier to pipe. If you got to go back and retrofit a multifamily community with 5 buildings, putting gutters in place that then have piping that goes to a central cistern, it's very disruptive to the community when you try to retrofit that. It doesn't usually pencil. But when new construction takes that into consideration, it's far more viable.
Thomas, you've got a different view, right? Many different funds. You're sort of quarterbacking all of these. How does this stormwater issue play out for you? Any comments?
I think on that aspect, I think there's a couple of valid points which have been mentioned. For us, due to the size of the portfolio, I think it's important that we take more of a global perspective. We link this in with our physical risk policy. So in the sense of that, we analyze actually from a global perspective where these kind of instances are most frequently occurring, so that we can actually ensure that our asset management teams have based on the size of the portfolio, the data which is required to react to it. And then in terms of what was mentioned, for example, by Ben, it's in the case of a development or a redevelopment, it's the most crucial point in an asset lifecycle to actually react to certain type of risks and to ensure that these risks are mitigated before they ever occur, and to ensure that the asset is prepared. On that, so what have we done is we have, as I've already explained, redesigned our ESG development policy to ensure that it reacts to it, and that we base ourselves on aspects such as the EU taxonomy, and that we can ensure that when an asset is touching this point in an asset's life cycle, so being redeveloped or being developed, that all of the necessary measures can be taken into account. So it's much more a data-driven approach due to the size of your portfolio, and then developing dedicated guidelines. Why? Because I think that education is a key thing, not only with respect to stormwater, but also water management in general. Is our asset managers, they're financial people. They're not per se environmental experts. So you need to deliver them the appropriate education and the appropriate guidelines, but also tell them where to look to ensure that they can take the right action, which is also based on the respective financial impact, because it's still connecting the ESG performance with the financial impact being dedicated losses or to ensuring the liquidity of our assets.
So let's keep picking at that. And before I do that, so to the audience, we've got some questions that are coming in. I'm seeing my email move. It's tricky for me to watch that. So if you could post something in the chat, that'd be awesome. Thomas, let's stick with you for a second here. Let's talk about inertia. You brought up the whole financial nudging, if you will, with the asset managers and the portfolio managers. So that seems like it's the top tool and lever. Is that true? Are there others? How do you motivate people to, now that they've benchmarked and perhaps understand that their building isn't running as well as others, how do you move them forward?
I think there's a couple of aspects on that. So you have the liquidity aspect, which links in quite well with investor expectations. Our investors have dedicated expectations on ESG. Water is one of them. It's embedded fairly well in certifications. It's reflected as such in GRESB. So from a capital raising perspective, and to ensure that we position ourselves as the ESG driven investor that we intend to be, it's important that we take the actions on asset level. On the other aspect, it is also making the link with the financial side. So it's ensuring that where we are covering the respective bills, that we have the data, that we understand it, and that even in case of a leak, that we react to it as rapidly as possible. And for that, identification is key. What we've seen with SmartVatten is that the devices are very easy to install, which allows for data access. Yet it's also crucial that the appropriate person receiving the leak alert is identified, because otherwise there's an alert going somewhere, but no one's reacting to it. And I think that's key. And what we've seen on one of our assets in Luxembourg is that the maintenance team reached out to us afterwards to really thank us for implementing the devices, because they were able to identify a leak over the weekend, which otherwise would have lasted for at least a couple of days, and was leaking 150 liters a minute. So you can multiply that by the time of a weekend, and you'll get to quite an adequate sum. And when you're managing a portfolio the size of ours, it's crucial that you really implement at scale, react to it, because small numbers add up very quickly when you're managing 2,000 assets.
Well, that gets back to the too little water, not so good. Too much water, also not so good, right? So well done on helping that team over the weekend for sure. Ryan, how about on your side? Battling through inertia, getting people to pay attention to these issues. Anything?
I think it's more of an internal issue as far as selling it to our leadership and things like that, because, we mentioned earlier, decarb is the priority for most people. They're a little more familiarized with that over the last, getting beat over the head with it the last 3 or 4 years. Whereas water is that secondary piece. But I think we're in a unique position where we operate, California, that it isn't as hot, it isn't as difficult as some other funds may have it. I've worked at companies in the past where we had, properties all in every single state. And California is by far the one that is on top of this a little bit more, just because of the water availability issues. So I don't see it as much of an issue, but again, it's certainly secondary. But I think it represents a huge opportunity for us, because we're not tracking it quite as closely. But again, I mentioned earlier, we have visibility into all of our water usage. So I think it actually is somewhat of a larger opportunity for us. The only issue is you can't really go water neutral, right? So you do have to temper expectations. You put out these, we're gonna go carbon neutral by 2050, something like that, and then you say 10% over 10 years doesn't really seem to stick with people as much. But 10% is still a really good goal for 10 years. We do need water to run the buildings. This is just 10% is optimization, is what I see it as.
Makes a lot of sense. Yeah. No, well, Ben, I was going to go to you, because you and Carl are in the thick of it, right? Mm-hmm. Trying to encourage people to adopt these technologies. So Ben, keep going.
So a word about California and water and greenhouse gas. By PG&E, Pacific Gas and Electric's own calculus, over 20% of California's energy is embedded in water, moving it from places it's abundant to places it's not, heating it, treating it, reclaiming it, reusing it. When you've got an embedded greenhouse gas cost in water, every gallon that you save has a GHG offset. There's a carbon footprint reduction in water savings. The EPA has calculators for same, California EPA. So I'd like to put it back to you, Dan, as you talk to customers about not just water efficiency, but also how they can benefit their carbon scores. Where does water play?
Yeah, embodied carbon is certainly an issue within the industry, and it's trying to calculate it is challenging for sure. So I think there's more news on that front, but I hear you, 20% to move it, store it, heat it, treat it. is an awful lot of carbon and an awful lot of energy. And it's a negative externality that comes with our water that we need for life. So,
Yeah,
go ahead,
we
Carl.
also from Smart Button made the same observation, obviously, and we are now indicating the equivalence in CO2 consumption of the water saved or the water leaked from our clients here, and I also feel that there is an increasing, request or demand for more information around that from our customers. So that's really seems to be kind of something that they can relate to, and that really brings the topic up a notch on the ESG agenda when we start to discuss it in terms of CO2.
You can make more electricity by putting photovoltaic panels on the roof or the parking lot covers, but you can't make more water. We've only got what we've got available. And I think when asset managers look at property acquisition or existing property as they plan to sell it, water stress, the threat of inefficient water, or lack of availability to water factors into the valuation methods of a portfolio. Where do I build? If I'm looking at expanding my portfolio into Arizona, I've got to put water calculus there to determine, how big a footprint and how I landscape or what kind of efficiency structures I put in place. There's risk associated with building in a place that's arid and under threat of drought. I don't know from a portfolio ownership standpoint if either Thomas or Ryan's investors think about the water risk in their calculus as they invest in property, but any words on that would be great.
Yeah, I mean, it's embedded in all of the climate risks that we track and report on through our TCFD analysis. But yeah, water is obviously a huge factor given how dedicated we are in California for us. Water stress and availability.
But it's also changing. We're seeing different areas due to climate, changes in the climate have, challenges that happen with water. We saw a lot of flooding last year, particularly in Europe. At least I did through my news feeds. So, Thomas, is this affecting? Are you finding more properties that didn't have water problems all of a sudden having water problems? Is that a thing? Is it an issue?
I think on one front, a lot depends on the quality of the data that you use. I can echo a lot what Ryan said is that.
Did we lose Thomas there?
We lost him. Okay.
I can speak to that a little bit while we get him back, and it's I think that the climate is changing too quickly for kind of the jurisdictions or whoever's rating these things. We can sit there and say, oh, that property's outside of a flood zone, but there's a flood there. So I think we can't really just take it with exactly what the maps show us, that say, oh, well, this one's outside of a flood zone or there's no water stress here. We have to be able to operate and analyze that in real time based on real situations. So I think that's a real challenge for us as owners.
Sorry, I can build on what Dan said here. So we had some floodings last year in Europe. The year before, we had real big droughts. Rivers were drying out. They had to close nuclear power plants because they didn't get cooling water and so on. So it's like you said, either too much or too little, but it really is changing now with climate change.
The way regulatory agencies work in California also based on billing, the old model was, let's sell as much water as we can. That's how we make our money. We'll hand wave at conservation. But as drought threatened, in California, Southern California gets water from two places, the Colorado River, which, as we all know, has been under great stress. And then in Northern California, where water comes through dams and gets piped down through the State Water Project. But water rates have changed dramatically as well. And the way people are being billed for water has changed. Rather than a flat amount of water being applied with a rate, there are what are called water budget rate structures that have been put in place that say, we're going to analyze your footprint of property and your class of property, and we're going to give you a budget that's based on how water can be consumed on average and how it changes over the course of a year. So there's a parabola, if you will, of you get a little bit of water in the beginning of the year and a lot more water in the hot months, and then it goes back down. And if you use your allocation, you're billed at a normalized rate. But if you go over those allocations, you're actually put in place fines or water rate increase tiers. And in some water billing agencies, they've gone to using language on the bill that when the accounts payable people see it, unsustainable use or egregious waste, these are words that are actually showing up on bills. And then, accounts payable people push that back to the organization saying, why are we paying an egregious fee here? Well, how do we mitigate that? So the agencies are themselves trying to figure out how to be stewards of the water in their built environment and using a progressive structure around water budgets and using weather data. In fact, many California companies use HydroPoint weather data to inform those billing structures so that they can not just rely on a single weather station for all the microzones where they've got metered connections. So we're doing everything we can to help the state, do a better job of being fair about how they bill, but also, just helping drive water use to those budgets so that customers don't unfairly pay for waste.
Yeah, I just want to add on to like the unexpected costs that we're seeing in California is we have some jurisdictions that force us to do periodic audits for compliance reasons. And if we don't hit certain water scores in our Energy Star portfolio manager. So that's another added cost that we were totally unexpected when we have to go and perform an audit, which may cost $5-10 grand a year. So just to add on to what Ben was saying, there's all these unforeseen costs that if we don't optimize our usage that we could be subject to.
Interesting.
And in multifamily, let's face it, nobody wants to just look at two rocks and a cactus when they go home from work, right? They want to see a landscape of something, but there are native plants that can be drought tolerant and be appropriate to the climate they're in. There are regulations now on turf where if it's non-functional turf, and the way that's defined in California is if no human interacts with the turf except the guy who comes to mow it, perhaps it's a candidate for turf replacement. And there has been an enormous set of rebates in place for taking out acres and acres of non-functional turf, and there continues to be rebate money applied for those kinds of policies.
Excellent. All right, so as we come to the top of the hour, I'm looking to see if we can offer the audience tips and tricks. Best tip and trick to big takeaway for the audience from your perspective as to how they can take the information that we've gathered and shared today and move forward with their portfolios. So Carl, do you want to start? And we can probably just kind of keep going. You can let's start with one, but you might have a closer too right at the end. Carl, go for it.
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks, Dan. And I mean, first of all, we all need to prepare for a future of increasing water scarcity, I think, across all regions of the world. That's obvious by now. But there are many ways to save water without compromising on the quality of life. But I would say starting point is really to take control of the water usage by measuring it and get that data on a real-time basis so you really can see those anomalies that occur. That will inform you about what kind of water waste is ongoing in that property.
Let's stay in Europe. Thomas, top tip or trick?
So from my side, I think it's quite clear that regulators, investors, the public all expect us to act, but we need to do it in a smart, efficient, and effective way. And on that, I can only echo which has already been said or what I flagged before, which is you need the right data, so you need to access it, you need to educate your respective teams in order to understand the data, and then you need to react to it in an appropriate way. And for that, you need the right tools on asset level, which is where entities such as the one that Carl's representing, SmartVatten or Ben, is absolutely clear.
Excellent. Part of that's the benchmarking annual process with GRESB, wash, rinse, repeat. See where you are, continue process, continue getting better. Ryan.
I would agree. Mitigate loss is really what it is. We want to keep as much water as we're using for the purpose of what that water is intended. So I would say mitigate loss and optimize anything that we have on site, whether that's low flow devices or things like that, or controls such as HydroPoint.
Ben?
I think making sure that you're not wasting through breaks in the systems, missing heads, broken lateral lines, stuck valves, things on the irrigation side that are common, making sure that you're not leaking water and wasting it, for non-landscape purposes. And then comparative analytics, just looking at the water used by whatever metric you choose, number of rentable units, irrigated acreage, building envelope. Doing comparative analytics across a portfolio of property will show you which units which property assets stand out as inefficient, because you've got a benchmark, you've got a normalization, and then you've got people that are above or below that curve. Focus your energy on conforming those outliers to normal.
Martina, there's 7 points on the line this year. Well, in every year, right? 7 out of 70 in the performance section of GRESB are based upon water, data coverage, reducing it. I think our numbers are going to be up this year. What are you seeing in our home office?
I hope so. And I really liked what Ben said. Unlike electricity, we can't produce more water. So we have what we have. Let's try to preserve it, to save it. And for the entities, we encourage everyone to start early on with the GRESB reporting and see where they stand in terms of water and what kind of measures they can take to improve their water consumption year over year.
Thank you, Martina. Thank you, Ben, Thomas, Carl, Ryan, to everybody that's joined us today for this session on water. I think it's the first ever water webinar that we've had, and it certainly won't be our last. This has been great for me. I hope it's been great for all of you. With that, signing off. July 1st is the deadline for the 2024 GRESB submission this year. Looking forward to watching the benchmark continue to grow and making progress with all of our members. Thanks again for joining today.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.